So we'll talk about fair trade coffee. Now, fair trade is just one certification among many possible. I mean, if you've been to the supermarket or coffee shop, you've seen some of these type labels. Coffee labeled fair trade certified, Rainforest Alliance, UTZ4, CI, and then other sorts of labels like organic. Each of them has subtle variations. They're not quite the same thing, but they all have a basic goal, returning more of the value to the farmers who grow the beans. Coffee is often consumed by people in wealthy countries who have disposable income, but produced by poor folks who see very little of the proceeds of that sale. These are a way to get a bit less of that, to perhaps make the exchange a bit more even. Many of them also have an aim of encouraging more sustainable agricultural practices and other kind of ESG stuff like we were talking about last time. Fair trade is generally attributed to Max Havelaar, Dutchman, around 1988. Fair trade farmers ought to use natural fertilizers to be better for the environment. They commit to no child labor and to paying a minimum wage for their laborers. They create co-op associations of small farmers who work together to sell their harvest. Part of the issue of why coffee growers tend to receive very little money for their harvest is that individual farms are often small, so one family with a few bushes just doesn't have much power in the market. Whereas maybe if the small farms cooperate together, they can get a better bargain. Now, it's all good in principle, but actually putting it into practice is complicated. Fair trade certification is not free. There's a global organization that creates a bunch of rules. Fair trade certification requires that farmers form into cooperatives, and those would usually own the mill where the beans are initially processed. Basically, when coffee is initially harvested, it's the seed of a fruit. It's got to be separated from the rest of the fruit and dried out. After initial processing, called curing, it is green coffee. It's roasted much later. But there's value in that first step, and fair trade wanted the farmers to be able to capture more of that value. Then they can work directly with the exporters. Everybody throughout the supply chain needs to be certified, every link of the chain. The exporters from the growing country, the importers into the U.S., the wholesalers. Because, of course, there are incentives for unscrupulous people to mix together the beans. Fair trade beans are meant to be more expensive. Somebody along the line would like to mix in some cheaper beans, claim they're all fair trade, and they can make some extra profit easy. The way that fair trade provides incentives to not cheat that way is that businesses which are certified can make additional profit. And if they get caught cheating, then they would be decertified, which is important, though of course it means another reason why fair trade beans would be more expensive to final consumers. Anyway, fair trade offers a price minimum for beans sold, or the market price if that's higher, which certainly has been in recent years. Then fair trade offers farmers a 20-cent premium over the market price, which is to be reinvested in a manner democratically chosen by the co-op members. One common choice about how to spend that money is that since farmers are in rural communities without access to high-quality schools, they want their kids to have an opportunity for a better life. Now, these higher prices are only paid for beans that are sold as fair trade, but not all the beans are produced by the co-op are sold that way. Most farmers would like to sell more of their beans at the fair trade price because it's higher, but there aren't enough buyers. Certified coffee, whether fair trade or other certifications, only makes up something like 15% of U.S. grocery sales. And that's just grocery for at-home consumption. Obviously, a lot of beans go to other outlets. Starbucks, Dunkin', McD, restaurants, hotels, corner deli, Typically, a fair trade certified co-op might sell around a third of their output as fair trade beans, while the rest, which are identical, are sold in the regular market. All right, this graph shows the coffee C price for Arabica. That's the bluish, usually the low line. The yellow line shows the fair trade floor price, but not the premium. The pink line shows the price that fair trade farmers can get for their fair trade beans. They get either the market price or the yellow price floor, plus 20 cents more. Now, 20 cents a pound is not a lot, but it is a big difference for a poor farmer. If price is around $1.50, then that's more than 10% extra. Now this graph only goes to 2018, but you get the idea. It looks like the price was at the floor something like half the time from 2013 to 2018. So let's see, this is the same graph from an earlier lecture showing the coffee C price, pennies per pound. So it's recently above $3 a pound. You can see the price fluctuates a lot. It makes planning ahead really difficult, especially for some of the poorest people. Imagine working hard for a year and only finding out at the end how much income you get, what you get paid for all that hard work. Being a small farmer means being an entrepreneur and taking on a good deal of risk. Put this into round numbers. Fair Trade Farm, we said, might sell around a third of their output as Fair Trade certified. And maybe half the years they get the advantage of the price floor. So their advantage to being certified is something like maybe a sixth of their revenue. To a real approximation. I mean, that's not nothing. It's a good step in the right direction, but it's also important to scale back expectations about how much this can really change lives. Now, it's important to note that fair trade has some important insurance component. It would be more attractive to people who are most worried about risks. And one of the biggest differences in who can bear any risk is existing wealth. The poor people with the fewest resources are likely to find certification to be most attractive. Here's a sort of simple graph of the coffee supply chain, at least from a very high level. It's easiest to understand it from right to left, kind of backwards. At the right is the consumer, the person drinking the coffee. They pay the retail price to get coffee from a retailer. That retailer could be a grocery store selling beans or a shop selling coffee already made. The retailer will pay some wholesaler the wholesale price for the beans. Wholesaler likely got it from a roaster, which got it from some exporter, brought the beans into the country. That's all in the middle box there. To get coffee from the producer box on the left, usually that means the beans cross a national border. The U.S. does not grow much coffee, apart from a very few places like Hawaii, little California, and Puerto Rico. And those are, of course, often tied in with tourism. People might be more likely to buy coffee from, say, Hawaii after a vacation there. Over in the producer section, which I said usually in a different country from us, they're the small farmers, the big estate growers, the co-ops, the curing plant, the domestic traders. So the coffee beans that I buy in the grocery store went through a lot of different steps to get to me. For every dollar spent on grocery store beans, the retailer gets about 28 cents, wholesaler gets about 39 cents, and the producing country only about 33 cents. And that's split among the domestic traders, the mills, and the growers. And even the amount that goes to the farmer, that's revenue, not profit. They have to pay for fertilizer, they have to cover the rent on the land, they have to pay contract labor to help with the harvest. Their profits are unfortunately even smaller than that. Now, fair trade's coffee gets sold for something like $1.50 more per pound than regular coffee. So who gets that $1.50? Spoiler, not the farmer. Not much anyway. Retailers get most of it because they want to figure out information about various consumers. Some folks are just looking for the cheapest way to deliver the most caffeine into their bloodstream, right? They're not looking for quality. They just shop on price. Others, maybe a particular brand has become habit. That's, of course, what the brands want to develop. Shopper will just buy a particular label every time without much looking at the price. As for coffee, it's true for toothpaste, soda, potato chips. All those are brands they're trying to get people to be stuck with. Now, for a lot of people, that's actually most efficient. We just don't have to think much about the choices we're making. Nobody wants to stand in front of the shelf at the grocery store looking at the price of each option. You just want to just go buy it and get it and move on. But that makes the competition for new consumers even sharper. Since once somebody gets used to buying your brand, they're hooked. So the brands tend to compete for the younger customers, which is why so much advertising is targeted at younger people, because they're the ones who are just forming these habits. Folks who've been buying the same brand of coffee for a few decades are tough to get to change. So the retailers want to make their brands attractive to certain consumers and try to convince those consumers to be willing to pay more. Now, one way to do that is to put certain words on the packages. Now, some words have a legally specified meaning, but a lot of words are just total BS, like fresh or artisanal or 20% crisper, homemade, whatever. I mean, of course, they do. They find these magic words. They'll put a lot of total BS words onto the packaging. Maybe we'll get somebody to buy the product. But of course, if one person finds a magic word, then everybody else can use it, and everybody else will until every product includes those same magic words. Currently, it seems like the magic words of the moment are now with AI. Even for things where really not clear what WTF is have to do with AI. I mean, sure, maybe AI helped proofread the marketing copy, but what else? Yeah, but it seems like so many products nowadays have some nod to AI because that's seen as kind of a magic word that will get people to buy it. These keywords and SEO things, stuff. Now, there are some words that have legal protections of various sorts, so they can't be complete BS. I mean, they have some fraction of BS on there, nothing entirely pure in this world, but there are some standards. In the U.S., food labeled as organic has to follow some guidelines. There's some meaning to the word. Natural, on the other hand, is just total BS. You can put it in almost anything. Not legal advice, but really, just about every ingredient is somehow from nature. Maybe a lot of steps. Somehow. That word's not regulated, so producers can put it on anything. I mean, I don't know, like Red Bull is in some sense natural. I mean, sure, it's got a bunch of chemicals, but where do the chemicals come from? Nature. Of course, right? I mean, but yeah, brands are important. I mean, right now, how many brand logos are you wearing? You paid extra for them. Why? Why did you pay extra? Maybe you just like that brand, but why? Why do you like it? How did you figure that out? Maybe the logo signals higher quality. Maybe it'll last longer. Maybe it's meant as a signal to other people. I wear this logo because I'm the sort of person who can pay more for this logo. I'm fancy like that. Similarly, getting back to coffee, that's part of why people buy certain brands of coffee beans. I'm fancy like that. But, there's got to be some genuine quality to back it up. I don't know. Game theory, and also in evolutionary biology, for a signal to be effective, it has to be costly. Darwin, for example, looked at evolution and figured out that, say, a bird doesn't get good nutrition, doesn't get enough vitamins, will not have really bright colors on its feathers. And then it won't be as attractive. So even though bright feathers make it more noticeable, more likely to get eaten, it's a costly signal, but therefore it's attractive. The other birds will think that brightly colored bird is more attractive and it will have more offspring. That's the same idea for the word natural or the word organic. If I want my food to be certified organic, I got to pay for that. I have to make changes to the farming methods in terms of fertilizers and pesticides. That's all costly. Versus the word natural, that's cheap. Maybe I got to pay a graphic designer to figure out the font and the color, and it's cheap. So anybody can label their food as natural, whereas a label of organic, that's costly. So organic is going to be a more effective signal to consumers. Basically, companies figured out how to build a fence around the word organic, so that not everybody can use that word. Now, we won't get into legal strategies or the political lobbying that made it happen, but folks built the fence. They want to keep people out. If that word has value, farmers would be willing to pay to use that word, and they do. They pay in various ways, whether directly paying money to be certified or indirectly having higher costs because they're not using the cheapest fertilizer and pesticides. They'll be willing to pay as long as it's plus EV, a positive expected value. Now, this is a two-sided market, and that adds to the complication. Consumers are willing to pay more because they're getting some additional quality. Producers are willing to take on higher costs for that quality because they're confident the consumers will pay more. The certification has to be difficult enough to convince consumers it's worth paying for. Of course, if its certification is too difficult, then it would be more expensive and consumers might decide, not going to pay that much more. I mean, a little more maybe, but not that much more. Anyway, so we want to look at farms that participate in fair trade certification and those that don't. Let's see if there's a difference. This paper from 2022 did that for a sample of farms in Honduras. The first column of numbers shows the average for fair trade certified, and the next column for those that were not certified. There were some farms certified through other programs, but I'm just going to look at the polar cases. Bottom line is it's tough to see much difference here. Now we have to be careful in making any assertion about causality since the farms are self-selecting. It might be that the big efficient farms are less likely to get certified, in which case it could seem that certification is bad. We're not going to jump to conclusions about causation, but at least we can look at what's the difference between the two. Fair trade farms make less gross profit. This is US dollars per farm, converted at the exchange rate at the time. So about $2,700 versus a little over $4,000. Fair trade household income was lower, but not by as much. Fair trade households had just over $6,000 of income, while non-certified had over $7,600. That's because the fair trade farms had more diversification, so they got income from other sources. Fair trade farms are less likely to be below the national poverty line compared with non-certified, so that's a good sign. The head of household is a bit older, less likely to be female, and more education in the certified farms. Certified farms are larger in total, 6.7 hectares versus 4.8, but they have actually less of that land planted in coffee, 3.29 hectares versus 3.78. As I said, they're more diversified with other crops along with the coffee. There's not much difference in the altitude of the farm. The total production of coffee is lower for the fair trade certified, 56 quintal against about 100 for non-certified. Quintal is 100 pounds, which is about 46 kilograms. With a bit of calculation, you can say something about those differences. Fair trade farms produce about 56% as much coffee, but they get about 66% as much gross profit. That's 2,700 divided by 4,056. So they're selling at a better price. But they're less efficient since they have about 87% as much land growing coffee. That's 3.29 divided by 3.78. So some of that lower efficiency comes maybe from things like how much of the shade is for coffee is provided by native species. That's that last row there. Or from less use of fertilizer. Now this sample is only looking at Honduras, but it seems unlikely the situation would be much different in other countries. Fair trade certification is a help for farmers to produce a bit less coffee, but get a bit more money. But there's a trade-off, and some fraction of farmers make other choices. Now this might change when coffee prices turn once they start to fall again. The survey was done when prices were strengthening, so the insurance aspect was not as important. But still, this is an important and useful data point. Now, the next step to ask is if consumers are paying about $1.50 more per pound for certified coffee beans, and producers get about 1/7 of that, a little over 20 cents a pound. Where's the extra money going? Survey finds the most premium goes to farm owners, who are about 1/3 of the people working in the coffee sector. But they find no impact on wages paid to the workers who contract for the seasonal work on the farm. That's about 60% of the people there. If I'm a farm worker, I get paid the going rate to work on a farm, whether I work on a certified farm or a different uncertified farm. I get the same wage. The survey also found a small reduction in income for some of the intermediaries who lose out to the co-ops, but they're a small slice of the population. Is there much evidence for other benefits? Well, I said a lot of the co-ops use the fair trade premium to support local schools, but there's not evidence that there's an improvement there. Maybe there's some benefit that we're not measuring. I mean, education quality is notoriously difficult to measure. But still, overall, a lot of the fair trade benefits, in terms of increase in revenue, goes to cover the certification costs. Producing fair trade coffee is more expensive. They use less fertilizer, less pesticide spray, and so have lower yields. So the net benefits are mixed, which is basically what the theory predicted. The point of the certification is to build a wall. Certain coffee beans are special and they get a higher price. People are willing to pay money to get over that wall, though. That's what we see. Certification requires natural fertilizer. As Angelo has explained, natural fertilizer just doesn't hit as hard. Coffee bushes have a short sprouting season. They require a lot of nutrients in a short window of time. It takes a lot more natural fertilizers to replace the artificial stuff. And then they don't spray as much pesticide, so yields are just inevitably going to be lower. He said you can make an argument that this is not surprising. It's an exercise in branding. Fair trade is a brand, just like Adidas or McDonald's. Brand was created to appeal to consumers in rich countries, perhaps without too much input from the people who might get the most benefit. So perhaps it's not surprising that most of the benefits go to making consumers feel good about their choices, without actually making much difference in the farm. Some consumers are willing, in a sense, to bundle their coffee choice with a modest charitable donation. Now, that's a widespread model. There are other businesses where, a consumer buys a pair of shoes, the company donates another pair of shoes to a poor person. There are various programs trying to make a change in the world. So how could fair trade be improved for the farmers? Suppose we want to do better. Now, it is a really hard problem. I'm not claiming that I could do any better. Just consider some of the options, though. What if we dialed back on the environmental stuff? Clearly, the current farmers might like that in the short run, but would consumers be willing to continue paying that premium? How much less might they pay if they're going to get a less stringent process? The fair trade certification costs something. And that would also maybe mean more farmers joining to try to get certified. If it were easy, more people would do it. Another option would be consumers more willing to pay for fair trade certification. Said only about 15% currently are willing to pay. So obviously it would be good if that number were higher. But how? Typically the way to do it would be advertising. Maybe a new marketing campaign to convince consumers to look for that label. That ain't free, though. Who's going to pay the additional cost? I don't know. Alternately, if the non-certified coffee were more expensive, maybe there'd be less of a price difference. But how could that happen? Well, maybe if there were less competition in the market. But again, it's not clear how that's going to happen. There are a lot of new countries entering the market. Vietnam made a big push in the Robusta market, and they're trying to make the inroads with more Arabica planting. Other countries too. Less competition is not likely to happen. What about new standards? What if fair trade would be replaced by some other standard? Look at the example of organic versus natural foods. We see consumers are already not exactly flocking to certified choices. Organic is something like 6% of the coffee market. It's difficult to see any change around the corner. The last option would be something like wines have the appellation of origin control. Wines have that. It's only champagne if it's from the Champagne region of France. Otherwise, it's just sparkling wine. That old line. Now, although I wrote geography on the slide, to be clear, that's referring to lines on a map. Somebody drew a line, decided good over here, bad over there, or at least not bad, but not quite as good. But there's not a really tight relationship with the geology of the soil type or sunlight or rain or microclimate or whatever. There's a fuzzy, generic relationship there. Or at least there was when those lines are drawn, but a big part of it's just marketing. Government drew the lines on a map. They created winners on one side of the line and losers on the other side. Two grape plantings might have the same rock underlying the same soil. Same sunlight exposure, same rain, everything looks like they should be comparable. But one of them's on the right side of that map, and those grapes are worth more. And of course, who gets that extra? Do the people picking the grapes get paid more? Of course not. They're laborers. Who gets the extra money? The landowner. And, and certainly in France, the family that owns the land can often trace back the title to some long ago nobility. Some ancestor got the land because, they were a specialist in violence. They had sharp tools and a short temper. A couple centuries ago, those vineyards were declared to be special. And now bottles of wine produced from those grapes go thousands of dollars. It's some branding. Maybe the coffee producers can find a way to brand their products. But it's tough. There are lots of firms up and down the value chain. They're all trying to build a brand. And let's be honest, the producers in the poor country lack some of the cultural power to do that. But that's another discussion.